This is the Master Brewers Podcast, brought to you by the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, a volunteer organization dedicated to continually improving the products and processes of our membership since 1887.
Let's go!
Master Brewers brings you interviews with the industry's best and brightest in brewing science, technology, and operations.
Calm down, I'm moving too fast.
This Master Brewers podcast is proudly sponsored by Hopsteiner, a global leader in the hop industry focused on quality, sustainability, and innovation in new hop varieties and hop products. Contact our brewery sales team to provide you with the hop-related tools you need to craft your next great beer. For more information, visit hopsteiner.com.
Additional support provided by
Get to know Proximity Malt. We malt superior, European-style, low-protein varieties grown close to home in Delaware and Colorado. Domestically grown, precisely malted to style. With our team of seasoned experts and 2 brand-new malt houses, try what's really new in malt. Check us out at www.proximitymalt.com.
With cleaning and hoses, more isn't always better. If you're just leaving cleaning chemicals in your hose, you can expect the service life to be drastically reduced.
This week on the show, Brewery Hose. Michael Caviness joins us to talk longevity, selection, storage, cleaning, and more. Let's talk about longevity. What kind of service life should we be expecting from Brewery Hose?
Yeah, in terms of service life, hose, like any elastomer, has a finite service life. And although, I get it, hose is relatively expensive, it does have to be replaced, I'd say on average, every 3 to 5 years. And, as we all know, time flies, and 3 to 5 years goes by much, much more quickly than you thought. And all of a sudden you're thinking, nah, I just bought this hose. I don't need to replace it. But that's when problems occur. So, the ways to know that you need to replace the hose are, just as a matter of, your own policies and procedures, put an expiration date on it. As soon as you buy it, give it an average. Just say, okay, I bought this in December of 2018, so we're going to replace this in December of 2022, and just write that on the hose. If you wanted to take a more cautious approach, I guess in terms of your budget, inspect the hose on the inside. And of course, I'm sure you can imagine it's difficult to inspect a hose on the inside, which is where most of the problems are going to be likely to occur. And I did read a good comment there on the Master Brewers forums, saying that some people will cut an end off the hose and inspect that cut end interior to see, okay, is there any cracking? Does it look like it's in good condition? I mean, is the compound there, solid and not flaking off or anything like that? However, then the problems becomes, now I've got a hose with one end on it. So, you can reband it, take it to your local hose shop and have them put on a new end for you or what have you.
Yeah, I worked at one larger brewery that's kind of what we did was each year you cut the hoses down. So you start with, a 20 foot, and the next year that's 2 10 foots, and the next year then that becomes, 5 foot. And then it gets, then it's past its life and the short hoses are thrown out.
That's a killer idea.
Let's talk about storage. I've seen some folks store brewery hose capped. Do you want to talk about why that's a bad idea?
Well, I would say you mean capped like with an end on it, right?
Right.
Okay. I'd say it's not a bad idea as long as the hose is dry. Although I'm curious to hear why you think that might be a bad idea.
Well, I think in most cases it's not dry because they're storing it. We're talking about short-term storage. So, you finish using it for something and then I guess they're thinking that they want to keep things from getting into the hose, but it's not going to be thoroughly dry right away, right?
Yeah, no, that's nasty.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, you want to do it when it's dry so that something can't get into the hose, but doing it when it's wet is gross.
Yeah, and I've seen some other folks mention too about suggest storing hoses full of sanitizer or something like that.
No.
And yeah, so why don't you tell us why that's a bad idea?
Yeah, so in general, when we're talking about cleaning hoses, we have a maximum time of in contact with your cleaning chemicals of 15 to 30 minutes is the best recommendation. So if you're just leaving cleaning chemicals in your hose, you can expect the service life to be drastically reduced. It's not good at all.
So for all those pub brewers out there who say, you know what, it's not going to hurt to let this CIP run a little bit longer. I'm going to, let it keep going while I go have lunch or something. That's actually not such a great idea, huh?
Right. It's going to reduce the service life of the hose. And additionally, I think sometimes people, it may not hurt your tanks. Stainless steel, may not have any adverse effects when you're running cleaning, or when you're using, when you're running cleaning protocols too long. But you can't apply the same cleaning protocols that apply to stainless steel to hoses because, they're thermoplastics that can react adversely with these cleaning chemicals, particularly if they're in contact with them for a long time.
Anything else you want to say about storing hoses?
In terms of storage, when I go into a brewery, I look around and it's, pretty clear where the hose is stored. Most breweries I see kind of toss the hose over their tanks, and hose elastomers have a memory. And when they're stored in a certain way, they will want to continue to remain in that position. So if you store the hose bent, with its weight pulling down on the center, when you take that hose off and you bend it back into place or bend it in another direction, it's more likely to crack in the place where it was bent. And that's obviously exactly where you can't see it because it's dead center of the hose. So the best practices for storing that we've found are to support the hose over its full length, allow it to drain completely. So either, have several hose racks making an arc or a slope, and then draping the hose over that so that it's fully supported, letting it dry completely. And if it's not going to be put back into service shortly, cap the ends once it's completely dry so that you don't have anything crawling in there and causing havoc.
Generally speaking, what's hardest on the hose? Is it going to be the the acids that are used versus the caustic cleaners, or something else entirely?
It's a combination of the cleaning chemicals and the temperature. That tends to have more adverse effects on the lifespan of the hose than any one in particular. As long as you're following the rule of keeping these chemicals in contact with the hose for 15, maximum 30 minutes, you shouldn't see any adverse effects. And as long as you're referring to chemical compatibility charts, most of those charts will give you good practical guidelines on what to use and how to use it.
Every now and then, the topic of pickling hoses comes up, especially from old timers that have been in the industry for a while. In fact, I just saw something recently on the Master Brewers community site talking about trying to get rid of a rubber or sulfur smell from some gaskets, and people brought up again the topic of pickling hoses. Oftentimes, that involves storing spent yeast in the hoses for some period of time to sort of break in the hoses. Is that just like old wives' tales for brewers, or is there any truth to that?
It works. You do have to do it under the light of a full moon. And I mean, the first time I heard about that actually was when I gave this talk at the Master Brewers Conference, Northwest. It's really interesting. And if I were writing the hose instruction manual, I don't know that I would include a chapter on pickling hoses. That said, if it works, it's not hurting anything. So, go for it. Of course, I'd say you probably will get as good results if you just follow an initial cleaning protocol. But I'll leave that one up for debate, I suppose.
Okay, but theoretically, you shouldn't have to do anything different the first time you go to use a hose. It should be just a normal cleaning process and use it, right?
Theoretically, yes. I think maybe it came about more in the earlier days of hoses when perhaps the compounds weren't as refined, or when natural rubber was a more popular hose liner material.
That would make sense.
Because natural rubber, does have a pretty strong odor to it. But yeah, that's my theory anyway.
I like it. Okay, let's go with that. All right. So another interesting topic that you brought up that I had never heard of before was storing hoses near electrical panels and transformers. What's the problem there?
Yeah, so that's kind of unintuitive, but electrical panels can give off ozone. And yeah, you might not think about that, but yeah, if you're storing it next to, your 230 volt equipment, yeah, it can give off ozone. And I don't think that ozone is commonly used as a sanitizing agent in breweries, is it? It is sometimes in wineries.
Yeah, it's not unheard of. There's a little bit of that, and every now and then you encounter someone who wants to give that a shot or who is doing that. I've only seen it in my career for mold removal in a large warehouse type of brewery that isn't climate controlled during the summer months. That's the only time I've really ever encountered it.
Interesting. Yeah. So ozone, it's great for sanitizing. It does it very quickly and seemingly easily, but it attacks elastomers, and unless you have elastomers that are specifically spec'd for use with ozone, it can destroy them pretty quickly. And so, to that end, anything that gives off ozone naturally, such as electrical panels, it can attack and degrade the hose.
I'd like to talk about one topic that came up on the Ask the Brewmasters site not terribly long ago, and that was talking about chlorobutyl hose liner failure. There was a very interesting thread on there that was started, I guess it's been a couple of years ago now, but Chris Scholl, who's actually on the executive committee right now, he made a post and basically said, we noticed what is described as a white sticky substance on the surface of some of our stainless tanks. We were advised to check our beer hoses, and upon inspection, we discovered that the chlorobutyl hose liners have degraded and the liner material can easily be scraped off. So he goes in and talking about that, and then there's a whole host of responses about it. I've actually experienced the same thing, and Robbie O'Kane, who actually I used to work with at Star Hill, he also posted on there about the failure that we had there. And in that case, they determined that it was caused by running a nitric phosphoric acid at a high temperature, but that being combined with copper entering the system, and they found that out by doing basically by seeing the copper staining on the liners there. So I just wanted to see if you have anything interesting to add on that. It's really an interesting thread with a lot of good information inside of it, but I wanted to see what you had to say about it.
Yeah, it was an interesting thread, and it wasn't totally clear to me that in all instances you could say, okay, case closed, this is what it is. However, it seemed to me that the most likely culprit was, as indicated in one of the posts there, the age of the hose, the time in contact with the cleaning materials. And one guy chimed in there saying that they were soaking their hoses in cleaning solutions and they experienced the same failures. Okay, well, that one's a pretty cut and dry case. But in many cases, yeah, my strong suspicion is that it's a matter of hoses just going beyond their recommended time in use, and then
maybe combining that with if your chemical is a little too strong or if the temperature's a little too high, and that being a contributing factor to the decreased shelf life, right?
Yeah, exactly. And with cleaning and hoses, more isn't always better. This is one case where, yeah, like you say, it makes sense to pay attention to how long am I cleaning these hoses? Am I staying within the recommended guidelines for time and temperature? And yeah, as long as you're doing that and following a hose replacement program within a certain time frame, then you're probably going to never experience this particular issue. So, yeah, that thread was in 2016. Then everyone in that thread probably needs to go out and take a look at their hose and change them if they're still using them when the thread was still active.
That's right. And I thought, Carl Ockert he mentioned a great idea, which you kind of touched on earlier, that I really just don't see many folks doing. But yeah, get a Sharpie and go out there and write on the hose, the date it was installed or the expiration date or something like that, because otherwise, there's a lot of turnover in the industry, and who knows when that hose got put into service.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you've got like a little electric, etcher that you might use to put your name on your tools or something like that, just, go to the bands or go to the crimped ends and put, like I say, expiration date of, December 2022. I think that personally, giving the hose an expiration date is more effective than saying when it went into service. An expiration date is kind of more like, proactive, saying that, okay, if you're using this hose after this date, you're doing something wrong.
Coming up,
EPDM in general doesn't have the same mechanical wear resistance that butyl does.
I'm John Bryce, and you're listening to the Master Brewers Podcast from the Master Brewers Association of the Americas.
This Master Brewers Podcast is proudly sponsored by Barna Mechanical, a full-service design build firm specializing in turnkey process and utility systems for the brewing industry. We partner with some of the best craft brewers in the U.S. to ensure the great beer they brew is what their customers get in every glass, bottle, can, or keg. You know beer. We know breweries.
Additional support provided by
ABS Commercial is a full-service brewery and parts outfitter. From our Raleigh headquarters to our Denver office, we proudly offer brew houses and fermenters from 3 barrels and up, yeast brinks, boilers, kegs, chillers, tri-clamp, and other stainless parts, all with the quickest delivery and lead times in the industry. Learn more at abs-commercial.com or call 877-BREW-ABS. ABS Commercial. We are brewers.
Here's what's coming up on the Master Brewers calendar. The District Eastern Canada Christmas Party is December 19th in Montreal. Looking ahead into the new year, District St. Louis meets at Anheuser-Busch January 17th. Is PCR right for your brewery QC program? Check out the Master Brewers webinar January 24th. The District Ontario Annual Conference is January 31st and February 1st. District St. Louis meets February 21st at Third Wheel Brewing, and the 2019 California Joint Technical Conference is February 28th and March 1st in Paso Robles. It's not too early to start making plans for the 2019 Master Brewers Conference. If you can only make it to one conference in 2019, this should be it. We're really mixing it up this time and heading to the Calgary Convention Center to see how Alberta celebrates Halloween. Will there be a costume party? Only Tressa knows. Check out the full calendar of events at mbaa.com for more details or to find a district meeting near you. Now back to the show. Let's talk about hose selection. What factors do brewers need to consider before purchasing brewery hose?
Well, kind of the standard answer that you'll get is that you should follow the STAMPed rule, and STAMPed being an acronym that's widely used throughout the hose sales community, standing for size, temperature, application, material, pressure, ends, and delivery. And I've said before, I think a few of those were thrown in to make it a nice acronym. But regardless, it's one of those checklists that if you go down and check each one off, you're not going to go far astray. Like a pilot's checklist or a surgeon's checklist. You may think that you know the answers, but once you sit down and think about it, it really is good to get them all squared away before making a purchasing decision.
Okay, well, let's go through that list a little bit. So what is there to talk about in regards to the S, size?
So with size, again, it may seem relatively straightforward, but the main things that I think, when I'm talking to people about buying hose that they don't consider is that if you've got, 1.5-inch tri-clamp ends in your brewery, you don't necessarily need to have a 1.5-inch hose. And typically, the most common sizes, of course, are 1.5 and 2-inch tri-clamp, but you could get a tri-clamp end that's 3/4-inch hose by 1.5-inch tri-clamp. And the reason that you might want to do that is first off, cost savings. Smaller diameter hose is generally less expensive. It's lighter weight. The biggest fear I think people have is that they're going to lose flow rate if they go to a smaller hose. And typically as the diameter decreases, you have to increase the pressure in order to achieve similar flow rates. But on a craft brewery scale, the difference between 1-inch hose and 1.5-inch hose in terms of flow rate may not be as big as you think, but when you're lugging it around all day long, it's a huge difference. So
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about temperature? That seems pretty important. What should we talk about there?
So for temperature, obviously you've got the standard operating temperature, which is listed for pretty much any brewery hose that you're looking to purchase, as well as the max operating temperature. And so those are the obvious things. The other things that you might need to think about are, okay, what temperature am I going to want to clean at? Is this hose rated for steam cleaning? If so, how long before it starts to break down or whatever? The main two things there are just operating temperature, cleaning temperature, and any other temperatures that it may be subject to.
All right, let's hear about application.
So application, this one's pretty straightforward, and again, maybe one of those things because stumped is not such a good acronym as stamped. But regardless, just think about what's the application that you're going to be using it for. Is it going to be, the main things are for a brewery, is it an indoor application or an outdoor application? Indoor hoses and outdoor hoses are generally composed differently. They're the biggest difference is going to be in the exterior. Obviously, if it's outdoor hose, it's going to be more rugged, subject to things like breaking down from sunlight that indoor hoses may not need to be as concerned about. In general, outdoor hoses will be more rugged and slightly more expensive than indoor hoses.
We did an episode a while back about kegs, and we talked about sunlight. If you're storing your kegs outside, sunlight breaking down that rubber seal at the top of the keg valve too. So that's something that probably a lot of people don't think about. Even if you're indoors, it's possible you might be storing your hoses in direct sunlight with the near a window or window that's open or a garage door or something like that. So that's something folks certainly ought to take into consideration.
Yeah, sunlight will break down some hose exteriors over time or relatively quickly, depending on the material it is made of.
Speaking of material, the M in stamped is for material.
Yeah, and that's, of course, material referring to the material that is to be pumped. And in a brewery, by and large, you will be pumping beer. But of course, the other things that you may be pumping in a brewery, or certainly will be pumping, are going to be, mash and wort and wastewater and, of course, other ingredients that find their way into your beer. Or certainly, I see a lot of breweries expanding into distilleries as well. And all of these compounds can require different types of hoses, or certainly will, the longevity and performance will be best if you're using the proper type of material for the hose. So typically within a brewery, we see chlorobutyl as being the most common and most popular material for pumping beer. It's not inexpensive, certainly, but it tends to have the widest range of chemical compatibilities, the widest range of temperature compatibilities, and to be the most suitable for and inert, I should say, so that it's not interacting with the beer itself, but is a static element in your brewery that you don't really have to think about.
There's some other options out there as well, like EPDM and nitrile and some other stuff too. I get that butyl has the widest range of compatibility with some of the more common conditions you might see in a brewery, but why don't you talk about some of the other options and maybe talk about where they excel or fall short?
Yeah, certainly. For a long time, hoses were made out of natural rubber. Certainly still some hoses are. But as hose technology improved, they found that certain compounds reacted better with certain pumped materials or had better longevity with it. So yeah, there's butyl being the primary one for specifically chlorobutyl. The one that we sell a heck of a lot of, specifically to distilleries, is UHMW, also called LLDPE. I think that's linear low density polyethylene. But anyways, it's extremely inert. We recommend it for anything that has an alcohol composition above 50%. So from 50 to 96%. And then at 96%, we generally recommend a groundable hose, which is something that people don't often think about, but obviously above 96%, you can have sparking hazards just from the static electricity that occurs as a part of liquid flowing through a tube. So a groundable hose is recommended in those cases. And in breweries, it may not be so common unless the brewer is also distilling.
So is alcohol resistance really the only difference between distiller hose and brewer's hose?
Yeah. Well, there's also, I'd say, distiller's hose, UHMW, has a narrower acceptable temperature range than butyl. But from a day-to-day usage perspective, yeah, you shouldn't notice a huge difference between a hose marked distillery hose and a hose marked brewery hose. That said, anytime you're cleaning them or using them with any particular chemicals, check a chemical compatibility chart. But my strong suspicion is that you wouldn't see any huge differences between a brewery hose and a distillery hose.
I've seen a lot of hoses labeled as Vintner hose too. Any difference there, or are they just putting a different name on it?
Pretty much. A lot of hose, I think, is marketing, and similar with beer, I suppose. The ley line, the exterior covering, I've had a hose manufacturer call me and say, "Hey, look, got this hose that's vineyard hose. However, breweries aren't buying it, even though it would work perfectly well for breweries. So we're thinking about, switching out the ley line to make it more marketable to brewers. And, it's the same compound. But I get it. If you have something in your facility, it makes you feel better if, I'm a brewery, if my hose says brewery on it, or at the very least, doesn't say wine.
Right. Right. How about EPDM? I know that's another common material. What are the pros and cons of using EPDM for your hose?
So EPDM in general has good chemical acid resistance. It's got a wide variety of temperatures that it's able to work with. And typically we see it used in like steam hoses, washdown hoses, those types of things. I'd say that the main con for it, and it's relatively inexpensive. The main con for it is that EPDM in general doesn't have the same mechanical wear resistance that butyl does.
Okay, so EPDM less rugged than butyl in general. Well, I think I hijacked your acronym, so I think we were probably up to what, P?
Oh man, yeah, P. Okay, so P is another easy one. Pressure, but of course it applies to vacuum too. Most brewery hoses are reinforced with stainless steel helices throughout the hose, so they should be good for pressures that are generally happening in a brewery or a vacuum. But yeah, if you're going to go inexpensive on hose, then you just want to make sure that your operating pressures are in line with what the hose can handle.
Is that the only purpose that steel reinforcement serves, being in the hose? The pressure?
Yeah, it's the main purpose, I would say. Structural support in general, the ability to bend without kinking. When you've got a softer material like some of these compounds, having a stainless steel reinforcement allows it to bend without kinking more ably. Although, and I think I mentioned this in the presentation, you can sometimes get the same types of hoses that are called crush resistant, and those will be without the stainless steel wires, because obviously if you run over a hose with stainless steel helices in it, it's going to crush, and it's going to remain crushed, and it's as good as gone. However, again, I'd say 98% of the hose that we sell is not quote unquote crush resistant, and people just do fine as long as they don't run it over with a forklift.
Okay, so I guess we're on let's see, E here now, right?
Mm-hmm. E. Yep. So E is the ends, and of course this one will probably be the most straightforward for any brewer. They know what type of ends they use in their facility. If they're a tri-clamp facility, if they're a cam lock facility for whatever reason, or if they're using Pacific Coast thread or something exotic like DIN. So yeah, just making sure that you have the correct ends for your application, or that you are aware of how to adapt to the ones that you need.
How about talking about sort of the different options for banding those hose ends on? I know there's few different ways that can be done.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, in terms of applying the ends, you may or may not have to worry about how that's being done. Perhaps your hose vendor will take care of that for you. But I know some breweries like to buy bulk hose and then band it themselves in the field. And so typically, there's either banding, external crimping, or internal expansion. So I'll start with banding. Banding is when you take a barbed hose end, you jam it in there, and then you use a special tool, typically made by a company called Bandit. And they sell either preformed clamps or reels of hose banding material, and you apply the ends yourself. If you go that route, my only advice is to use 2 bands per end on anything 1.5 or smaller, and 3 bands per end on anything 2 inches or larger. To try to use long hose ends so that you can get all 3 bands on evenly, and to stagger the bands so that the buckle is on opposite sides for each band. That's a good option also if you need to, make hose repairs in the field. If you did, do what I just said and accidentally run over your hose with a forklift, well, you can get a hacksaw, hack both ends off, stick hose ends back in there and band it quickly, and you're not completely out of the $1,000 or whatever you spent on that length of hose. Crimping and internal expansion tend to be the domain of hose vendors and distributors exclusively, because the machines to apply a crimped hose end are really quite expensive, particularly on 2-inch hose and larger. It's the same general principle. Stick a hose end in, and then you put a crimp sleeve over, and then these big jaws come and clamp the crimped end onto the hose. And that's probably, I would say, the most popular style for breweries, because it makes a clean application, there's fewer surfaces for stuff to get stuck in, I suppose. But more difficult for a brewery to do in the field. And whereas a little bandit tool might cost $200, a hose crimper is thousands and thousands. And then finally, internal expansion, which is where you stick the hose end in. You've got a serrated material on both the hose end and on the outer ferrule, and you pull a bead through the hose end, and it expands it to fit. And for a while there, that was kind of the ultimate for breweries, because it provides a clean end without any change in the surface. It's completely flat all the way through from the hose end to the hose. But I think it's not quite as popular anymore lately for whatever reason. I don't know. But those are the three main ways to apply a hose end.
All right. Well, that wraps it up, except for delivery for D. What is there to talk about in regards to that, or does that just round out your acronym?
It's closer to rounding out the acronym, I'd say. But the only things that I would say are relevant to someone like me who's a hose merchant are that standard sized hose lengths will generally increase the speed of delivery. So, many places will say, okay, hose comes in 100-foot rolls, so we're going to cut 5 lengths of 20-foot, and we'll just keep those stocked. Whereas if someone calls me and they say, okay, I need 17.5 inches here, and then 32.5 feet here, and yada yada yada, it may take longer to have that particular piece of hose delivered. So all that is to say, plan ahead.
That was Michael Caviness here on the Master Brewers Podcast. Check out the show notes for a link to the presentation Michael gave at District Northwest, as well as links to the Ask the Brewmasters threads that were mentioned in this episode. Hey, remember the Belgian beer book that Sten Mertens and Jan Stencils talked about on episode 101, The Yeasts of Tomorrow? Well, great news. It's now available in the Master Brewers bookstore. Just go to mbaa.com/store and type Belgian beer into the search bar to get your copy today.
On the ground, just like that one day.